The rain hammered down on the cracked asphalt of a forgotten side street in the shadow of the city hospital, turning the world into a blur of grey and silver. It was just past midnight when the scream pierced the night, a child's voice, raw and desperate, cutting through the storm like a knife. Little Ethan, no more than 8 years old, huddled against the chain-link fence behind the emergency room dumpsters, his small frame soaked to the bone, face streaked with mud and tears. He'd slipped away from his mother's grip during a chaotic check-in, the fever raging through him, making everything spin. Now, alone in the downpour, he clutched his side, coughing violently, the kind of cough that rattled like loose gravel in his chest. No one inside the bustling ER had noticed his absence yet. The night shift was overwhelmed, lights flickering under the strain of too many patients and too few hands. That's when she appeared, Emily Harper, the night nurse with steady eyes and calloused palms from years of pulling people back from the edge. She was on her break, stepping out for a breath of air that tasted like wet concrete and distant thunder when she heard him. Without a second thought, she pushed through the back door, her scrubs clinging to her skin, flashlight beam cutting the darkness. "Hey, kiddo," she called softly, kneeling beside him, her voice a calm anchor in the chaos. Ethan looked up, eyes wide with terror, but something in her gaze, warm, unyielding, made him reach out. She scooped him up, his weight light as a feather against her, and carried him inside, barking orders at the desk nurse as she burst through the doors. "Fever's spiking. Get me a room, stat." Within minutes, she'd started the IV, cooled his burning skin with damp cloths, and whispered stories of brave nights to distract him from the needles. By dawn, Ethan's color had returned, his breathing steady, the crisis averted. Emily stayed by his side until his mother arrived, frantic and grateful, pulling her into a tearful hug. "You saved my boy," the woman sobbed. Emily just smiled, wiping her hands on her pants. "Just doing my job." But in the cold light of morning, the hospital's administration saw things differently. Emily had bent protocol, taking a patient outside the official channels. No paperwork until after the fact. The head administrator, a man with a tie too tight and eyes too sharp, called her into his office that afternoon. The room smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets. "You're a liability, Harper," he said, sliding the termination letter across the desk. "We can't have vigilantes on staff. Clean out your locker by 5. Emily stood there, the words hitting like a slap, her mind flashing to Ethan's relieved smile, the mother's gratitude. She didn't argue. She'd seen enough corruption in these walls, budgets slashed for corner cutting, patients triaged by insurance status rather than need. But this, firing her for saving a life, it felt like the final crack in a dam she'd been holding back for years. Word traveled fast in the tight-knit world of the underbelly, where loyalty ran deeper than blood. Jacob Thorne, Ethan's father, was a towering figure with ink-black tattoos snaking up his arms, remnants of a life spent riding the edges of the law. He wasn't always like that, once a mechanic with dreams of a quiet garage, until the war chewed him up and spat him out, leaving scars that ached in the rain. Now, he led the Iron Vow, a motorcycle club forged from veterans and outcasts, bound by an old promise to stand for the forgotten, to ride for justice when the system failed. Jacob had gotten the call from the hospital at 2:47 a.m., his phone buzzing on the nightstand as he stared at the ceiling, haunted by ghosts of battles long buried. "Your boy's safe," the voice had said, "thanks to one of our nurses." He'd arrived just as Emily was finishing her shift, shaking her hand with a grip like forged steel. "You got a promise from me, ma'am. If you ever need anything, the vow rides for you." He hadn't expected to need to cash that in so soon. When Ethan's mother told him about the firing that evening, over takeout burgers in their cramped apartment, Jacob's fork paused mid-air. The TV droned in the background, some news clip about budget cuts in healthcare, but he barely heard it. Emily's face flashed in his mind, tired but fierce, the kind of strength that reminded him of the brothers he'd lost overseas. "They can't do that," he growled, pushing back from the table. His mind raced back to that promise, whispered in the dim hospital light, an oath not just to her, but to the code that had kept him alive through the sandstorms and firefights. The iron vow wasn't about chaos, it was about redemption, about chosen family stepping up when the world turned its back. By nightfall, Jacob was in the club's weathered garage on the outskirts of town, the air thick with the scent of oil and leather. The overhead lights cast long shadows on the rows of gleaming Harleys, engines cooling from a recent run. He gathered them one by one, his second in command. A grizzled vet named Ryan with a limp from an IED, the quiet enforcer Nathan, whose silence hid a philosopher's soul, and the rest, 24 strong faces etched with their own hidden wars. "Listen up," Jacob said, his voice low and steady, echoing off the concrete walls. "A nurse saved my boy last night, pulled him from the rain like he was her own. Today, the suits fired her for it. We're not letting that stand." Murmurs rippled through the group, nods of agreement like the first rumbles of thunder. This wasn't vengeance, it was honor, the kind that bound them tighter than chains. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the convoy assembled under a sky clearing to stars. Engines roared to life, a symphony of growls and pops that shook the ground. Headlights piercing the dark like beacons. Jacob mounted his bike at the front, the weight of the club at his back a comfort he'd never trade. They rolled out in formation, tires humming over the wet roads, heading for the hospital that had betrayed its own. Emily, alone in her small apartment, stared at the eviction notice, mingling with her pink slip on the kitchen table, unaware that the promise she'd earned was about to thunder through her door. The ride wasn't just for her, it was for every soul the system had discarded, a reminder that some bonds outlast the storm. In the distance, the city lights flickered, oblivious to the force gathering on its fringes. Jacob's mind settled on Ethan, safe in bed, and the nurse who'd given him that gift. Dawn was coming, and with it, a reckoning wrapped in leather and loyalty. The vow would ride until justice bent to their will, or broke trying. The convoy cut through the night like a blade through silk, the low growl of 24 Harleys merging into a thunderous pulse that echoed off the sleeping suburbs. Jacob Thorne led the pack, his broad shoulders hunched against the chill wind that whipped at his leather vest, the iron vow patch gleaming faintly under the moonlight. Behind him, the riders formed a steel serpent, Ryan on his left flank, nursing the old wound in his leg, but refusing to lag. Nathan to the right, his face a mask of quiet resolve, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of trouble. The air carried the sharp tang of exhaust and damp earth, a scent that grounded Jacob, pulling him back from the edges of memory where sand and gunfire still haunted his dreams. This ride wasn't born of rage. It was forged in gratitude, a vow etched deeper than the tattoos on his skin. They skirted the city's veins, avoiding the main arteries where cop cruisers prowled like sharks. Jacob's mind replayed the hospital corridor from that morning, the sterile white walls closing in, Ethan's small hand finally relaxing in his as the fever broke. And Emily, with her no-nonsense calm, the way she'd met his eyes without flinching. "Family's what you make it," she'd said offhand, handing him a cup of lukewarm coffee while waiting for the discharge papers. Those words had stuck, mirroring the creed that had pulled him from the abyss after the war. The Iron Vow wasn't a gang, it was a brotherhood, pieced together from shattered lives, mechanics turned riders, vets seeking purpose, all bound by the promise to lift each other when the world kicked them down. Tonight, that promise extended to her. As they crested the hill overlooking the hospital, the building loomed like a monolith of glass and steel, its emergency lights pulsing red against the black sky. The parking lot was a ghost town at this hour. sodium lamps casting orange pools on empty spaces, the only movement a lone security guard dozing in his booth. Jacob signaled with a gloved fist, and the engines cut to a hushed rumble, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant hum of the city. They pulled in single file, boots crunching on gravel as they dismounted, forming a loose semicircle near the main entrance. No one spoke. Words were for the weak moments. Ryan leaned against his bike, lighting a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the scar across his cheek, a souvenir from a convoy ambush overseas. "This place reeks of suits hiding behind clipboards," he muttered, exhaling smoke that curled like fog. Inside, Emily Harper paced her dimly lit apartment 2 miles away, the eviction notice crumpled in her fist like a bad hand in poker. The room was sparse, a sagging couch, a stack of medical journals on the coffee table, a photo of her late brother tucked on the mantel, his uniform crisp in the frame. She'd lost him to the same war that had marked Jacob, a roadside bomb that stole him before he could come home. Nursing had been her anchor since, a way to stitch wounds she couldn't heal in herself. But tonight, the betrayal burned fresh. The hospital's decision wasn't just about protocol, it was about protecting their image. Sweeping under the rug how they'd let a child wander into the storm because the ER was understaffed from their endless cuts. She sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples, the weight of unpaid bills pressing like an invisible boot. A knock at the door jolted her, too late for visitors. She peered through the peephole, seeing only shadows. Back at the hospital, Jacob approached the entrance, the glass doors sliding open with a whisper that belied the tension coiling in his gut. The lobby was hushed, the night clerk glancing up from her magazine with wide eyes as the door chimed. Behind Jacob, the vow filtered in like a tide, leather creaking, boots thudding softly on tile, their presence filling the space without a word. The clerk's hand hovered over the phone, but Ryan's steady gaze pinned her. "Easy," Jacob said, his voice low, carrying the gravel of too many desert nights. "We're here to see the administrator. Tell him Jacob Thorne and friends have business." She hesitated, then buzzed the intercom, her voice cracking as she relayed the message. Upstairs, in the admin suite, the head man, Victor Lang, with his polished shoes and corner office, jerked awake at his desk, the call from security yanking him from a dream of balanced budgets. He straightened his tie, peering out the window to the lot below, where the bikes lined up like sentinels. A chill ran through him. He'd heard whispers of the Iron Vow, the club that rode for the overlooked, their runs sometimes skirting the law, but never crossing into outright chaos. "What do they want?" he barked into the phone, but the guard could only stammer about a nurse and a promise. Lang's mind raced to Emily Harper's file, the termination he'd signed off on without a second thought, another cog in the machine of efficiency. Now, it seemed, the machine had jammed. Emily's door swung open to reveal a young rider from the vow, a kid named Tyler with a fresh shave and earnest eyes, holding a helmet under one arm. "Ma'am, Jacob Thorne sent me. Said you saved his boy, and now it's time to ride back the favor." Her confusion melted into wary surprise as he explained, the club at the hospital demanding her job back, not with threats but with presence, the weight of their loyalty forcing the suits to listen. She grabbed her jacket, heart pounding with a mix of fear and fire she hadn't felt in years. The apartment door clicked shut behind her, and Tyler led her to his bike waiting curbside, the engine purring like a patient ally. At the hospital, Lang descended the stairs, flanked by 2 rent-a-cops whose hands twitched near their radios. The lobby had transformed. The vow stood shoulder to shoulder, a wall of quiet determination, their eyes holding stories of battles won and lost. Jacob stepped forward as Lang emerged, the air thick with unspoken challenge. "You fired a woman for doing right by a kid in the rain," Jacob said, his tone even, like stating facts in a confessional. "Ethan's my son. She pulled him back from the edge when your system let him slip. We're here to make sure that promise holds. Reinstate her or explain why not to every ear in this town." Lang's face paled, the fluorescent lights harsh on his sweat-slick brow. Murmurs from the vow rippled like distant thunder, not aggressive, but unyielding, the kind of force that bent bureaucracy without breaking bones. Emily arrived just as the standoff peaked, sliding off the bike and striding through the doors, Tyler at her side. The sight hit her like a spotlight, Jacob and his brothers standing for her as if she were blood. Lang's eyes darted between them, calculating the optics. A viral story of bikers storming a hospital for justice or quietly folding to keep the peace. "This is irregular," he stammered. But Jacob's gaze didn't waver. In that moment the scales tipped, not through shouts, but through the silent power of honor reclaimed. Emily met Jacob's nod, a spark of alliance igniting, the first thread in a web of chosen family weaving tighter under the cold institutional glare. The night stretched on, negotiations unfolding in hushed tones, but the vow's presence lingered like a promise etched in chrome. Dawn crept closer, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, a reminder that some lights pierced even the darkest shifts. Jacob felt the old scars ache less, the ride already mending fractures he hadn't named. For Emily, it was a turning point, the eviction notice forgotten in the rush of solidarity. The hospital's walls, once a cage, now echoed with the possibility of redemption, not just for her, but for all the forgotten souls they'd stand for, one thunderous mile at a time. The fluorescent hum in the hospital lobby seemed to grow louder as Victor Lang's voice cracked under the weight of his own words. "Irregular doesn't begin to cover this," he repeated, his fingers drumming on the edge of the reception desk like a man trying to summon authority from thin air. The air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and leather, the vow's presence turning the sterile space into something alive, pulsing with unspoken stories. Jacob Thorne stood unmoving, his arms crossed over his chest, the iron vow emblem on his vest catching the light like a badge of quiet defiance. Behind him, the riders shifted subtly, Ryan cracking his knuckles with a soft pop, Nathan's gaze steady as a sniper's, scanning the room for any flicker of deceit. They weren't here to intimidate with volume. Their power lay in the solidity of their line, a wall built from shared scars and unbreakable oaths. Emily Harper stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor, the chill of the night air still clinging to her jacket. Her heart hammered, not from fear, but from the surreal sight of these strangers. Rough-hewn men with eyes that held more than met the gaze, standing as her shield. She'd seen enough in her years at the hospital. Patients shuffled aside for paperwork, lives deprioritized for profit margins, but this, a brotherhood rolling in on chrome steeds to demand what was right. It stirred something deep, an echo of the loss she'd buried with her brother, the way he'd always said family was forged in the fire, not handed down. "Mr. Lang," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I followed my conscience. That boy was out there alone, drowning in the rain. If that's a liability, then maybe this place needs more of them." Lang's eyes darted to the security guards flanking him, their postures rigid but uncertain, hands hovering near belts that held more tasers than resolve. He swallowed hard, the knot in his tie suddenly too tight, as if the room's oxygen had thinned. Whispers from the night staff filtered in from the corridors, nurses peeking from doorways, a janitor pausing his mop to watch. The hospital wasn't just a building. It was a fragile ecosystem of rules and reputations, and the vow's arrival threatened to upend it all. Jacob leaned in slightly, his voice a low rumble that carried the dust of distant roads. "We're not leaving till we hear it straight. Reinstate her, apologize for the mess. Or we sit right here, tell our side to anyone who'll listen, reporters, families, the whole damn town. Your call." The tension coiled like a spring, the clock on the wall ticking past 3 a.m., each second amplifying the standoff. Ryan broke the silence first, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over engine roars. "Remember that run last summer, Jacob? The one for the widow down in Milford? We didn't back down then, and that was just a leaky roof. This is a kid's life. Our kid now." His words weren't for Lang, they were for the Brotherhood, a reminder of the promise that bound them. Nathan nodded subtly, his mind flashing to his own ghosts, a deployment gone wrong, a promise to a fallen comrade he'd carried like a stone in his boot. The vow wasn't born in bars or brawls. It rose from the ashes of war, a pact sealed in blood and brotherhood to protect the vulnerable when suits like Lang turned blind eyes. Emily felt the shift, the way the rider's loyalty wrapped around her like an invisible chainmail. She thought of Ethan, his small chest rising and falling evenly now, safe in his bed miles away. Jacob had mentioned him earlier, through Tyler's hurried explanation on the ride over. The fever broken, the scare over, all because she'd acted when no one else did. Gratitude swelled in her throat, mingling with the bitterness of betrayal. Lang, sensing the tide turning against him, gestured toward a side office, the door half open like an invitation to surrender. "Fine, let's discuss this privately. No need for theatrics." But Jacob shook his head, planting his boots firmer. "Public's fine. Let everyone hear how justice works around here." As they moved into the office, Lang leading with stiff steps, the vow filling the doorway like a shadow, Emily caught Jacob's eye. A flicker of understanding passed between them, the kind forged in moments of quiet heroism. Inside, the room was a shrine to bureaucracy. File cabinets humming softly, a desk piled with reports that smelled of fresh ink and faded ideals. Lang sank into his chair, the leather creaking under him, and pulled up Emily's file on his computer screen, the glow casting harsh lines on his face. "This isn't personal, Harper. It's policy. You bypassed triage. No incident report." "Policy that let a child slip into the storm," Emily interrupted, her voice rising just enough to echo her resolve. Jacob placed a hand on the desk, not slamming, but firm, the calluses from wrenchwork rough against the polished wood. "That boy is my son, 8 years old, fighting for breath because your understaffed ER couldn't keep track. She saved him. You fired her for it? Where's the policy on gratitude, on doing right?" The words hung, heavy as exhaust fumes, forcing Lang to confront the human cost behind his spreadsheets. Outside, the first hints of dawn filtered through the blinds, painting slivers of gold across the floor. Ryan and Nathan stood guard at the door, their presence a silent vow that this wouldn't end quietly. Tyler, the youngest, hovered near Emily, his earnest face a reminder that the club wasn't all weathered vets. It included the next generation learning the code of honor one ride at a time. Lang's resistance crumbled under the onslaught, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing a reversal into the system. "All right," he muttered, the admission tasting like defeat. "Reinstated, effective immediately, back pay for the shift, and an apology." He slid a printed letter across the desk, his signature shaky. Emily took it, her fingers brushing the paper, a mix of vindication and weariness washing over her. But as she looked at Jacob, she saw more than victory. She saw the spark of alliance, the beginning of a family chosen in the unlikeliest of nights. The group filed out into the lobby, the tension easing like a breath released. The night staff clapped softly, a ripple of approval spreading as word buzzed through the halls. Jacob turned to Emily, his smile faint but genuine, the lines around his eyes softening. "Promise kept, but if they pull this again, you call. The vow rides for its own now." She nodded, the weight lifting from her shoulders, the eviction notice a distant worry in the face of this newfound bond. As the riders mounted up outside, engines stirring to life with a collective growl, the sky brightened, the first rays catching the chrome like promises fulfilled. Dawn broke over the city, carrying with it the echo of loyalty's thunder, a reminder that some forces bent the world toward justice, one steadfast mile at a time. The sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot as the Iron Vow's engines idled in a low, rumbling chorus. Emily Harper stood at the edge of the asphalt, the reinstatement letter still warm in her pocket, its ink a fragile testament to the night's improbable victory. The air carried the crisp bite of morning dew, mixed with the metallic tang of cooling exhaust, and she watched as Jacob Thorne swung his leg over his Harley, the motion fluid, practiced, like a man syncing with the pulse of his machine. His eyes met hers across the space, holding a depth that spoke of battles unspoken, and she felt the pull of it, a tether forming in the quiet aftermath. The riders around him adjusted helmets and vests, their faces softened by the golden light, but etched with the vigilance of those who'd learned trust the hard way. Jacob nodded once, a gesture heavy with finality. "Get some rest, Emily. This ain't over till it feels right." She wanted to ask what he meant, to probe the undercurrent in his tone, but the convoy was already stirring. Tires crunching gravel as they formed up. Tyler, the young rider who'd fetched her, flashed a quick thumbs up before revving his engine, the sound vibrating through her chest like a heartbeat. As they pulled away, a disciplined wave rolling toward the city limits, Emily lingered, the hospital's facade looming behind her like a reluctant sentinel. Inside, the corridors buzzed with hushed conversations, nurses exchanging glances, the night clerk relaying the tale to the day shift. Victor Lang had retreated to his office, door firmly shut, but the echo of the Vow's stand rippled outward, a crack in the institution's polished armor. By midday, Emily was back in scrubs, the fabric familiar yet foreign after the night's upheaval. The ER hummed with its usual frenzy, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, the sharp scent of iodine cutting through the air. She moved through her rounds with mechanical precision, checking charts and adjusting IVs, but her mind wandered to the apartment she'd nearly lost. The bills stacked like accusations on her counter. The reinstatement came with strings, back pay delayed by processing, a vague warning in her file about future protocols. Lang had slunk by earlier, his apology delivered through gritted teeth in the break room, eyes avoiding hers as he muttered about team unity. It rang hollow, a bandage over a wound still festering. She'd saved Ethan on instinct, driven by the same fire that had pushed her through her brother's funeral. The flag-draped casket a blur under rainy skies. Honor, she'd called it then. Now it felt like survival. Across town, in the Iron Vow's garage, the air thickened with the aroma of fresh coffee and motor oil, sunlight slanting through grimy windows onto workbenches cluttered with tools. Jacob wiped grease from his hands on a rag, the black smudges a map of the morning's tinkering. The ride back had been silent, the Brotherhood processing the win in their own ways, Ryan nursing a black eye from an old grudge, Nathan sketching idle patterns in the dust with his boot. They gathered around the scarred wooden table, mugs steaming, the club's ledger open like a Bible of debts and favors. "They gave her the job back," Jacob said, his voice steady but laced with gravel. "But I smell the lie in it. Lang's type don't bend, they bounce." Ryan leaned forward, his limp more pronounced in the chair's confines, the scar on his cheek pulling tight as he frowned. "Heard from a contact at the union. Hospital's been cutting corners for months, understaffing, falsified reports to keep the funders happy. That kid slipping out? Not the first time." Nathan nodded, his quiet demeanor belying the storm in his eyes, memories of overseas clinics overwhelmed by the wounded surfacing unbidden. The vow had formed in the wake of such failures, a promise sworn over graves in foreign soil to shield the home front from the same neglect. Jacob's fist clenched around his mug, the ceramic warm against his palm. Ethan's face flashed in his mind, pale and feverish. The rain-slicked fence, a barrier no child should face alone. Emily had crossed it. Now, the club would ensure it stayed crossed for good. Word of the dawn confrontation had spread like wildfire through the city's undercurrents. Truckers at diners, vets at the VFW hall, even a few hospital insiders whispering over lunch breaks. By afternoon, a local blogger picked it up, posting a grainy photo of the bikes lined up, captioning it with questions about accountability. Lang's phone rang off the hook in his office, the blinds drawn against the intrusive light, his tie loosened as sweat beaded on his brow. He paced, dialing contacts in the board, his voice a hiss of urgency. These bikers, they're painting us as villains. If this goes public, the donations dry up. But the board's response was cautious, probing for details he couldn't spin. The vow hadn't threatened violence. Their mere existence challenged the narrative of control, forcing a mirror on the corruption he'd helped cultivate, prioritizing spreadsheets over souls. Emily felt the shift during her break, scrolling her phone in the empty lounge, the chair creaking under her as she read the online buzz. Comments poured in, support for the Guardian nurse, calls for investigations into hospital practices. A message pinged from an unknown number. Jacobs, she realized, the text simple. Ride with us tonight. Truth needs witnesses. Her pulse quickened, the offer a bridge from isolation to something larger. She thought of her brother, how he'd ride shotgun in her memories, urging her to fight the good fight. Slipping out early, she met the vow at a neutral spot, a roadside diner on the city's edge, neon sign flickering against the fading sun. The lot filled with Harleys, riders nodding as she approached, Tyler handing her a spare helmet with a grin. Jacob stood apart, silhouetted against the horizon, the wind tugging at his vest. They talked under the diner's awning, the scent of frying onions wafting from inside, voices low against the hum of passing traffic. Jacob laid it out, the deeper rot, the patterns of neglect that had nearly cost Ethan everything. This ain't just your fight, he said, eyes locking on hers, the weight of shared loss bridging the gap. Emily hesitated, then nodded, the decision settling like resolve in her bones. The vow would document it all, interviews with staff, records pulled through back channels, not for chaos, but for exposure, a moral thunder to shake the foundations. As dusk fell, painting the sky in bruised purples, they mounted up, Emily on the back of Jacob's bike, her arms tentative around his waist. The engine roared to life beneath them, a vibration that synced with her heartbeat, carrying them into the twilight toward the heart of the storm. The city lights blurred into streaks as they rode, the wind a cool lash against her skin, whispering of risks and redemption. Jacob's presence was steady, an anchor in the rush, his voice carrying back over the growl. Family's what stands when the suits scatter. She held tighter, the promise evolving, binding them in a web of loyalty that no bureaucracy could sever. Ahead, the hospital waited, its secrets unraveling under the gathering force of honor's relentless tide. If this chapter's tale of quiet courage and unbreakable bonds moves you, smash that like button below. It helps spread these stories of redemption far and wide. The neon glow of the roadside diner faded into the rear view as the Iron Vows convoy sliced through the twilight, a phalanx of headlights carving paths through the gathering dusk. Emily Harper clung to Jacob Thorne's back, the leather of his vest rough under her palms, the engine's vibration thrumming up her spine like a shared pulse. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of pine from the encroaching woods on the city's outskirts, a brief respite from the urban sprawl. Her mind raced ahead, piecing together the fragments Jacob had shared, the hospital's hidden ledgers, whispers of falsified safety reports, corners cut not just in budgets, but in lives. Riding with them felt like stepping into a current she couldn't control, yet the pull was magnetic, echoing the resolve she'd felt scooping Ethan from the rain. They veered off the main highway onto a narrow back road, the pavement cracked and shadowed by overhanging branches that whispered against the sky. Jacob's voice cut through the roar, steady and low. "We're heading to the Old Mill District, neutral ground, away from prying eyes. Got a contact there? Runs a print shop. He'll help us pull what we need without the suits catching wind." Emily nodded against his shoulder, her breath syncing with the rhythm of the bike. The Vow fanned out behind them, Ryan leading the second wave with his steady throttle, Nathan scouting the flanks, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. Tyler brought up the rear, his younger energy a counterpoint to the vet's measured pace. This wasn't a raid, it was a reckoning, pieced together with quiet precision, the kind of justice that honored the promise Jacob had made in the hospital's dim glow. The mill loomed as they arrived, a relic of rusted iron and boarded windows, its silhouette jagged against the bruised purple sky. Floodlights from the print shop spilled out like wary beacons, illuminating stacks of pallets and the faint hum of machinery inside. They dismounted in a loose circle, boots grinding on gravel that crunched like brittle bones underfoot. The air here was cooler, laced with the musty tang of aged paper and ink, a far cry from the sterile bite of the hospital. Marcus Hale, the contact, a wiry man with grease-streaked glasses and a limp from factory days, emerged from the side door, wiping his hands on an apron. "Thorne," he greeted, his voice a gravelly drawl, eyes flicking over the group with the caution of someone who danced on the edges of the law before. "Heard about your dawn ride. Bold move. What are we printing tonight?" Jacob clasped his shoulder. The gesture, brief but loaded with trust, earned over years of shadowed favors. Records from the hospital. Emily here's got access to the shifts. Patterns of understaffing. Kids slipping through cracks like my boy did. He turned to her, the weight of his gaze pulling her forward. Emily hesitated, the cool metal of a flash drive in her pocket, a copy of anonymized logs she'd swiped during her break, hearts pounding as she bypassed the admin lock. It wasn't theft in her mind, it was truth, the kind her brother would have chased. Documents over rifles. "These show the cuts," she said, handing it over, her voice gaining strength. "Dates when they ignored maintenance on the ER doors, shifted nurses to admin duties. Ethan's not the first. There've been close calls. Families left waiting while executives golfed." Marcus nodded, leading them inside, where the press hummed softly, screens flickering with digital ghosts. The group clustered around a scarred table, the scent of hot toner rising as files loaded. Ryan peered over Marcus's shoulder, his scar twisting with a frown. "Look at this. Last month, a delay in response time logged as equipment failure. But it's the same night they laid off 3 techs. Nathan traced a line on the screen, his quiet intensity sharpening. "And here, falsified triage priorities. Insurance first, always." The revelations unfolded like a dark tapestry, threads of neglect weaving back years, exposing how Lang's regime had prioritized appearances over the vulnerable. Emily's stomach knotted. Memories of her brother's letters surfacing, tales of medics stretched thin in the field, promises broken by bureaucracy. This was the home front echo, and standing with the Vow, she felt the fracture mending, piece by chosen piece. But shadows lengthened outside, and with them came the first ripple of opposition. A low rumble, not engines, but tires on gravel, signaled an uninvited arrival. Headlights pierced the shop's grimy windows, 2 black sedans pulling up like predators. Jacob's hand went to his belt, not for a weapon, but instinct, the Brotherhood shifting into a protective arc. Doors opened, and out stepped Victor Lang, flanked by 2 board members in crisp suits, their faces pale under the floodlights. Security trailed, hands visible but tense. Lang's eyes locked on the shop, the betrayal in his posture clear. He'd traced the IP from a sloppy hospital log, or perhaps a mole in the ranks. "Harper," he called, voice slicing the night. "This is trespassing. Hand over whatever you've got, or we're calling it in." The air thickened, the press's hum now a tense underscore. Emily stepped into the light, chin lifted. The reinstatement letter's victory feeling distant now. Call it what you want, Victor, but these files, they're the truth you buried. How many more kids before you fix the doors, the staffing? Jacob moved beside her, his presence a bulwark, the vow forming a silent line at the threshold. Ryan's voice rumbled low. You fired her for saving one. Now you're chasing shadows to hide the rest. Walk away, or the town's gonna see every line. Lang's allies shifted, one whispering urgently into a phone, but the bored man's face hardened, calculating the fallout. A scandal spilling into headlines, donors fleeing like rats. Tension coiled, the night pressing in with the scent of impending rain, distant thunder muttering like an omen. Nathan's hand rested on Emily's shoulder, a subtle anchor, his philosopher's soul seeing the moral precipice. This ain't about force, he murmured. It's about standing. Lang advanced a step, but Jacob's steady gaze held him, the weight of the club's history, a promise born in foxholes, refined on endless roads, unyielding. Whispers from the sedans hinted at reinforcements, but the vow didn't flinch. Their loyalty was the real armor, forged in the fires of loss and redemption. Emily felt it then, the shift from lone nurse to part of something unbreakable. Her brother's ghost nodding in approval from the edges of her mind. Marcus killed the press lights, plunging the interior into shadow, but the files were backed up, copies burning on hidden drives. Lang's bluff cracked first, his voice wavering as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Not for them, but a calculated feint. This isn't over, he spat, retreating to his car, the sedans peeling away with tires screeching on gravel. The Brotherhood exhaled, the tension easing like a storm passing, but Jacob's eyes remained vigilant. They'll push back harder, he said to Emily, the words of vow renewed. But we've got the truth now. Rides like this, they change the map. As they mounted up again, engines growling to life under the star-pricked sky, Emily settled behind Jacob, the wind rising once more. The mill receded, but the fire kindled their spread, a moral blaze illuminating the path ahead. Dawn's promise lingered on the horizon, not of easy wins, but of justice, pursued with the relentless honor of those who'd chosen family over fate. The convoy thundered on, bound by threads stronger than steel, toward a reckoning that would test every scar and seal every bond. The first drops of rain pattered against the windshields as the iron vow crested the final rise, the city sprawling below like a mosaic of flickering lights and shadowed alleys. Emily Harper's grip tightened around Jacob Thorne's waist, the leather of his vest a steady barrier against the chill that seeped through her jacket. The engine's growl beneath them felt like an extension of her resolve, carrying the weight of the flash drive secrets now safely tucked in Jacob's saddlebag. The mill confrontation lingered in the air like exhaust. Lang's retreat a temporary victory, but the storm clouds gathering overhead hinted at the backlash to come. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low echo of the Brotherhood's unyielding thunder as they descended toward the heart of town, the hospital's silhouette rising once more on the horizon. Jacob eased off the throttle as they neared the familiar streets, the convoy weaving through quieter avenues where sodium lamps cast amber halos on rain-slicked pavement. The scent of wet asphalt mingled with the pine from earlier, grounding Emily in the moment, her mind flashing to Ethan's fevered eyes in the storm, the catalyst that had pulled her into this web of loyalty. "You holding up?" Jacob called back, his voice cutting through the rush, steady as the road unspooling beneath them. She nodded, though he couldn't see it, the wind whipping her words away. "Feels like riding out the fever," she replied, the analogy slipping out unbidden, a nod to the night she'd first crossed paths with his world. His chuckle rumbled low, vibrating through them both, a brief light in the gathering dark. They pulled into the hospital's outer lot, not the main entrance this time, but a service area shrouded by delivery vans and overflowing dumpsters, the rain now a steady drum on metal roofs. The Vow dismounted in silence, boots splashing in shallow puddles that reflected the club's headlights like scattered stars. Ryan shook water from his hair, his scar glistening under the downpour, while Nathan scanned the perimeter, his quiet vigilance a shield against unseen threats. Tyler lingered near Emily, offering a spare poncho with a nod that spoke of inclusion. The youngest rider's earnestness a bridge between her old life and this new alliance. Marcus Hale had stayed behind at the mill, his presses already whirring to life with copies of the files. Anonymous packets destined for local outlets, unions, anyone who could amplify the truth without dragging names into the fire. Inside the hospital, the night shift had thinned, corridors echoing with the soft beep of monitors and the murmur of exhausted voices. Victor Lang's office light burned late, a solitary glow piercing the blinds like a guilty beacon. He'd spent the hours since the mill pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his board contacts offering platitudes laced with urgency. The files Emily had taken weren't just logs, they were dynamite, evidence of systemic failures, from locked emergency exits to manipulated staffing rosters that left children like Ethan vulnerable. Lang's empire of efficiency crumbled under scrutiny, donors whispering of pullouts, regulators circling like hawks. He slammed a drawer, the sound muffled by rain-lashed windows, unaware that the reckoning had arrived not with sirens, but with the quiet resolve of those he'd dismissed. Jacob led the way through a side door, the group slipping in like shadows, their presence announced only by the faint creak of wet leather. A sympathetic janitor, earlier tipped off by a nurse who'd overheard the buzz, waved them toward the admin wing, his mop forgotten in the corner. The air inside was warmer, heavy with the sterile tang of bleach and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the storm's raw bite. Emily's pulse quickened as they approached Lang's door, her sneakers silent on the linoleum, the reinstatement letter in her pocket now feeling like armor. Jacob paused, hand on the knob, his eyes meeting hers in the dim hall light. "This ends tonight," he said, the words a vow renewed, echoing the promise he'd made in Ethan's room. No more shadows for the forgotten. The door swung open without a knock, revealing Lang hunched over his desk, papers scattered like fallen leaves. He jolted upright, face draining of color as the vow filled the threshold. Jacob at the fore, Emily beside him, the others a wall of unblinking solidarity. Rain dripped from Ryan's jacket onto the carpet, marking their entry like footprints in sand. "You," Lang hissed, rising halfway, his chair scraping back. "This is harassment. Security." But his hand froze mid-reach for the phone, Nathan's steady gaze pinning him, the enforcer's silence more eloquent than any threat. Emily stepped forward, the file's weight metaphorical now, her voice clear amid the tension. "It's exposure, Victor. The cuts, the lies, how you let the ER doors stick because maintenance was non-essential. Ethan's slip wasn't an accident. It was your policy." Lang's eyes darted between them, the room closing in with the patter of rain outside, thunder punctuating Emily's words like judgment. He slumped back, the fight leaching from him as the reality sank in. The board's emails flooding his inbox, a reporter's voicemail waiting, the Vows network already seeding the story through back channels. Jacob leaned on the desk, his presence commanding without force, the scars on his knuckles a map of harder battles. "We're not here to break you," he said, voice low and even, carrying the dust of roads traveled for justice. "Fix it. Reinstate the staff they cut, secure the doors, put patients first, or the town sees every detail, the good, the bad, all of it." The silence stretched, broken only by the storm's crescendo. Lang's fingers trembling as he nodded. "I'll call an emergency meeting, first thing." It wasn't surrender, but the beginning of accountability, the kind that bent under moral weight rather than shattering. Emily felt the knot in her chest loosen, the vindication mingling with empathy for the man unraveling before her. a cog in a machine larger than himself, now forced to face its flaws. As they turned to leave, Jacob paused at the door, glancing back. "Remember the promise, Lang. Honor it, or we'll ride again." Dawn broke as the convoy reformed outside, the rain easing to a mist that shimmered in the rising sun, painting the world in soft silvers and golds. Emily mounted behind Jacob once more, the engine's warmth chasing the night's chill, her arms wrapping around him with newfound ease. The vow rolled out in formation, tires hissing on wet roads, the city awakening to whispers of change, a hospital vowing reforms, a nurse restored not just to her job, but to a purpose amplified by chosen kin. Ethan waited at home, his laughter a beacon pulling Jacob forward, while Emily's thoughts turned to her brother, the flag in her apartment now a symbol of legacies carried on. Miles melted away, the horizon opening to fields dotted with wildflowers, the wind carrying the promise of new roads. Jacob's voice rose over the roar one last time. "You saved my boy. We saved your fight. That's the vow." She smiled into the breeze, the bond sealed in thunder and truth. A family forged from rain-soaked nights and unbreakable loyalty. The engines faded into the distance, but their echo lingered, a testament to redemption's quiet power, justice's relentless ride, and the honor that outlasted every storm. Thank you for riding this journey of loyalty and redemption with us. Hit that subscribe button and join the Iron Vow family for more tales that thunder through the heart.